All right, we will call this meeting to order on June the 8th, 2020 at 1:04 p.m. of the Genesee County Employees Retirement System. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Brandon,
Here.
Carpenter, Quartz, is she there? Quartz, here. Seifert,
Here.
Hahn,
Here.
Mandelaris,
I'm here.
Russell,
Here.
Simpson,
Here.
Young.
Here.
All right, well, time set aside for public address. We have no emails from the public. If anyone else is on the line, we'll give them a chance. None, we'll move on to communication items. The Board of Commissioners has changed the official title for Crystal Simpson from County Controller to Chief Financial Officer. She's been duly sworn in and has her oath of office. Also, the ordinance was amended by the Board of Commissioners to reflect the CARE Act, which increases the required minimum distribution age to 70 and a half.
To the age required by the IRC, which is now 72.
Okay. And a updated copy of the ordinance can be found on the county's or the retirement office's website, or you can request one by email. Anything else, Jennifer?
That's it.
That's it. Okay, we'll move on to first agenda item A, approval of the minutes from the retirement meeting on May 11th.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mandelaris.
Support,
Get a
Quartz.
Support from Courts. Take a roll call vote.
Brandon,
Yes.
Quartz. Yes. Seifert,
Yes.
Hahn,
Yes.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, well, now to the approval of the investment committee meeting minutes from May 26th. Take a motion to approve.
Move to accept.
Support Seifert.
Young and Seifert, roll call vote.
Quartz. Yes. Seifert,
Yes.
Hahn,
Yes.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anything in the old business. We'll move on to section C, the new business. First
Hey,
up is
Brandon?
Nyhart. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Is that
Okay.
Jeff?
Yes.
Jeff Carpenter just joining in? All right.
Great.
Thanks, man. Sorry about that.
No apologies, sir. Moving on to agenda item C, new business. Number 1 is Nyhart's presentation of the actuarial evaluation. Danielle, you want it?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So it looks like, Jennifer, if you can stop sharing your screen, then I can share my screen. There we go. Screen 2. Okay, you can see the our management summary here, the actuarial evaluation.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there anybody that can't see it?
Hello, everyone. I'm Danielle Weingartner with Nyhart, and we have Nick Megos on as well. I know we've met with you all in person the last few years. We'll do Zoom today. Please let us know if you can't hear me, or if the screen goes black, or if you have any sort of IT issues. Please just holler, and hopefully Nick or I, one of us, is able to jump in and take over if there's any IT issues. Again, we're sorry we couldn't be here last month. We had everything just about prepared, and then we found out there were some asset changes. So rather than scramble and try and make the meeting, we wanted to take a minute and make sure that we understood the asset changes and how it would flow through the plan, and then be prepared to speak today instead. So today we'll go through the results as of 12/31/19 and some changes to last year's results and some thoughts about the future. All right, so if we start here on slide 4, the important thing to remember is today's results reflect assets as of 12/31/19. So that does not take into account what's happened to the market during 2020 and COVID and the implications there. At the very end, we do show some projections where we look and see, what happens if in 2020 assets lose 10%. Maybe that's hopefully very extreme, but just to give you some sort of sense of a scale. But when we look at 12/31/19, things were in a beautiful place. The assets earned almost 19% on a market value basis. We do smooth assets over 4 years. So on an AVA basis, assets earned a little over 8%. And that's what's reflected in your contribution requirement. Your plan does pay a 13th check to certain retirees if the AVA, the smoothed return, is over 8%. And that is just an automatic. So there is a 13th check or there's not. It doesn't matter like how far above 8% you were. So the plan was 8.3%, so we'll pay that 13th check. Last year it was about $550,000, so I would expect it to be a similar number this year. On the liability side, things really moved as we expected. There wasn't very much unexpected demographic changes. You did lower your interest rate by 0.15%, which has a pretty big impact of increasing liabilities by $9 million. That was slightly offset by a mortality just update that decreased liability slightly. So overall, the funded percentage increased just from 67.5 to 67.9%, and you had a slight increase in the recommended contribution. For Michigan reporting, all divisions are still above 60%, so you don't have any corrective action plans there. So I mentioned at the start that there is a change to the prior year results. We had a question on how the assets are allocated between divisions and worked with Crystal from finance on that. And there was a change to how the assets should have been allocated last year. We received that information from the county and they corrected what was sent originally. So what happens is the general and sheriff's portion changed from, I think, 52% down to 51%. It's a very small percentage, but it's actually a pretty large number because the plan is so big. So general and sheriff's contribution from the prior year results will actually increase by $520,000, and Mount Morris's will increase as well. And then that increase is sort of split amongst the other divisions as the contributions decrease. So this is the 12/31/2018 contribution that's paid during the 2020 fiscal year. You'll see that change below. And we have a bigger exhibit with more detail on how that shift happens. That should be in your packet. So next we'll jump into the participant information, the asset information, and the liabilities in a little more detail. Participant reconciliation from last year to this year. Again, no real surprises. We had about 48 people retire. 38 retirees died, replaced by about 11 beneficiaries. This is pretty typical year, nothing too out of the ordinary. The plan is split demographically pretty similar to last year. About half of the plan is made of that general and sheriff's division, and about 75% of the population is currently in receipt. So it's definitely an older population, a more mature plan than someone that's just a new plan that's full of active participants. And you can see the counts by division here. Again, here's just some more demographic information that you may want to review on your own. Average pay is about $65,000, and you can see how that's split between the different groups. And then participants receiving benefits, the average monthly benefit is about $2,300 a month. The asset reconciliation, when we look at how assets changed from, again, the beginning of 2019 to the end of 2019 compared to the year before, you see contributions are very similar across. We had 24 million come into the plan plus 2 million in employee contributions, and then about 50 million leaving the plan to retirees. We talked about earlier, this is a mature plan, 75% of the plan is in receipt. That's $50 million a year that's coming out of the plan to pay benefits. The biggest difference is right here, that investment income line. During 2018, the plan actually lost $9 million, where during 2019, it gained $76 million. So that really just makes a huge difference. And then down below, we show on a smooth basis, the plan still had a gain of $3 million. So we don't recover that full gain in 1 year. It's spread out over 4 years, which really helps you in bad years. When 2 years ago, when the plan lost 2%, it's very nice to have that asset smoothing. Last year, when the plan earned 19%, it's kind of annoying to have to give up some of that gain, but it is spread out over 4 years, which is nice. And slide 10 illustrates this. The red line is your actuarial value of assets, and you can see since 2012, it's been pretty flat, where that blue line is your market value, and that's went down and up and down and up. So, 2 years ago, pretty low, but your AVA was higher, and then kind of the opposite's happening this year. Slide 11 shows the liability reconciliation from last year to this year. We do expect your liability to increase every year with normal costs, which is the accrual of benefits for active participants. So every year, actives earn 1 more year of service and a pay increase, and that is part of the normal cost. So if your plan was more heavily active, this normal cost may be higher. As some groups are closed, like general and sheriff especially, that normal cost will stay pretty steady. Like, we don't expect that to really grow much. But then your liability does grow with interest every year at that 7.4%. And then again, benefit payments of 50 million. And we did have those 2 assumption changes that we discussed earlier. So then the liability demographic changes was 1.8 million, which is about 0.25%. So normally we like to see that demographic change under 2%, and you're at 0.25%. So that's a very good place to be. Just really means that sort of our assumptions are where they should be, and you're not having anything out of the ordinary happening. So the funded position by division really stayed pretty steady from last year. Again, we don't see a big increase in funded percentages because we're using that smoothed asset. If we were just looking at this on a market value basis, it would look more significant. So everyone looks pretty steady. And similar on the recommended contribution. So this is the contribution by division. Water and Waste and Road Commission, their contributions increased slightly from last year. And that's mostly due to the normal cost. They have more actives coming in, accruing benefits. They had a normal cost increase, and that's reflected in their contribution. General and sheriffs also had a contribution increase, and part of that is they're receiving a smaller portion of the assets. Their asset allocation decreased slightly from last year. And then the other divisions, library, mental health, and Mount Morris had a decrease in contribution. And these differences are compared to that 2020 revised contribution that we talked about at the beginning. And as a reminder, you did make a change, I believe at the end of 2018, to use a closed amortization approach. So instead of taking that unfunded liability and getting a new 25-year mortgage, you're doing these amortization layers. So that 25-year mortgage from last year has 24 years left, and then you have a new 25-year amortization of the new gain loss, which is a very small amount. So the big part of your unfunded liability is being paid out over 24 years at this point. And slide 14 just shows a graph of this contribution. And I think the important takeaway here that you can see visually is how much of your contribution is paying off the unfunded. If your plan was 100% funded, your contribution would only be these red bars, which is the normal cost, which is the cost of benefits accruing for new people or for your active. And instead you have these pretty significant purple bars that's paying off the unfunded. So once your plan gets to, a good point or a great point at 100% funded, almost no plans are there, your contribution can be very small and a pension plan can be very affordable. The problem is that you do have this gap, and so you're paying that off with your amortization payment. I think lastly that I'm going to talk about is this Michigan PA 202. Again, this is new. Maybe this is the third year for reporting, where we have to report to the state how well funded the plan is. And this is based off of your GASB 6768 assumptions. And for GASB purposes, we do use a 7% interest rate. So you're using 7.4% for funding and decreasing that by 0.15 every year. For accounting, we worked with the auditors and Crystal in finance, and they agreed to just use a 7% interest rate because that better reflects the expected rate of return. So for GASB reporting, each division is well above 60%, and that is the cutoff for this Michigan reporting where you have to put in a corrective action plan. For the state, you also have to report under these uniform assumptions, which is a 7% interest rate and the same mortality table that you're using now. So you'll see under this uniform assumptions, everything's the exact same because you're aligned with the uniform assumptions at this point. Next year, the uniform assumptions are changing to an updated mortality table that Nick's going to talk about here shortly. So just be aware that you will have an increase in liability for your state reporting due to that mortality change. We're also slightly concerned about 2020 returns. So depending on where 2020 assets end up, general and sheriff and road commission and possibly water and waste, you may be below that 60% threshold. And then we'd have to work with you and the state on a corrective action plan. So that's just something to keep in mind, that asset smoothing that really protects the plan from a contribution basis does not apply here, because for PA 202 reporting, you use your market value in your accounting numbers. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Nick. I believe you're on the line, right? You can.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Unless anyone wants to ask questions, this would be a good time to pause.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. As we get to page 16, a lot of the remainder of the presentation is more looking ahead and also thinking about any of the things that we assume or that could just happen in the natural course of running a pension plan that could affect all the numbers we calculated the next time we do it, whether it be next year or down the line. There's an actuarial standard of practice, that's what ASOP stands for, that requires us to really talk about the risk of different things that could impact the plan. And far and away, the greatest risk to the health of the plan is the investment returns. Just because there's so much tied to not only the contributions that you make to support the plan and get the plan funded up, but also the returns that we hope to make with those contributions that help fund the plan and make it, healthy and strong going forward. And there's a lot of variability there, as we've experienced over the last 2 decades for sure. The other things that could affect things down the line are really more of a demographic nature, these next two, whether specifically demographics regarding the, when people terminate or withdraw or when they retire, how much money they might make. Those things matter for sure. And certainly with some subsidized early retirement opportunities within the plan, if people retire earlier than we thought, that could cause losses that make liabilities maybe higher than we were anticipating. But maybe even more specifically, how long people live. And that we've compartmentalized that into longevity. That if people live longer than we're currently assuming, obviously all the payments are going to last longer, and those can have an effect. I think in the past, we probably had more risk there because we didn't, actuaries in general as a profession didn't project how much people's mortality was going to improve, even though inherently and intuitively we knew that people that were younger now will likely live longer than our current retirees. There wasn't really a mechanism that anticipated that, but now we have projected improvement or generational mortality, so we're a little bit more protected than we used to be against longevity catching us off guard. The other thing about longevity in terms of it being, I'll say, less risky than investment is that if we're going to observe or experience people living longer, it's going to happen very, very slowly. The impact will happen very, very slowly, as opposed to a 20% decline in the market or something relative to the expectation. Those things happen faster, and that's where the risk or volatility is higher associated with investment. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, Danielle. So along those lines, one of the most important, the most important assumption that we make when we're valuing liabilities is about investment return. The current approach for funding, when we're measuring liabilities to come up with a contribution amount is 7.4%, but with a plan to ultimately get to 7 at 15 basis points a year. So we've got a few years left before we're going to get there. The challenge there is a couple of things. One is 7% what we really should be assuming long term? And we've got some information here that we'll walk through that helps us discuss that. But then also we've got I'm hearing some echoing. Are you guys hearing that? I think it's gone away.
Yeah.
But we also have the challenge that if we really believe that maybe our expected returns given our current allocation are lower, we can't assume that current rate we use for funding, we have to use something lower for the GASB side of things. That's auditors are going to demand that. And to help us figure out what that right number is, we have some input, but more importantly, ANCO and Chris have given input there. But as we were walking through that input, we found that even 7% potentially could be challenging in the long term. But just to give you a flavor, if we had measured everything at 7% for this year for our valuation, our liabilities would have been about $26 million higher, and our funded percentage would have dropped down to 65.3. So it does impact things for sure when we measure using a lower interest rate. So next slide, Danielle. This next slide is what Chris provided from ANCO, and what he did here was show each of the different asset groups that your assets are invested in. Pretty high level breakdown here, but some detail, for instance, on equities, not just equities or U.S. equities, but large cap versus small/mid cap, and then an international element, bonds, real estate, direct lending, and a associated long-term real rate of return. And what that means is net of inflation. What do we expect to make on each portion of the assets that are invested? And what we see here with an expected inflation rate of 2.29%, the expected rate of return was about 6.52. The long-term real returns here were developed based on a survey done by an actuarial firm that does a lot of multi-employer work and that we see in the industry a lot. Multi-employer plans or union plans, they, just like public pension plans, have to set they measure the liabilities on what they think they're going to make on their assets. So they're very interested in this kind of exercise as well. And what they do amongst their clients is survey people like ANCO and others like them to give them different expectations for different asset classes. And there's over 30 respondents on that survey, but only about 15 or 16, I believe, and Chris, you can correct me on that. I'm doing this by memory, but only about 15 or 16 also give a 20-year expectation. And what we know is that the long-term expectation, at least at this point in time, is a little bit higher than what most of these types of folks are expecting over the next 10 years, which is consistent with the messaging we've heard at Mapers and really anything you read out there. But even with a 20-year long-term perspective on these returns, the expectation with your current asset mix is 6.5. And Chris probably has some more specific things that I'd like to share later. The thing that I'd say is challenging as an actuary is that this is supposed to be a long-term assumption, yet we've seen these long-term assumed rates of return or capital market expectations around these different asset classes change quite a bit year by year. So it becomes difficult to really zero in on, a 20-year kind of expectation. But because of GASB requires us to disclose some information around this assumption, and the auditors are checking this very carefully, we're going through this exercise each and every year. And it's just something to be mindful of, not only in the near term, and not because we need to get it right for GASB, but because if in the long run, given the current interest rate environment, which holds those returns down so much for that particular part of the assets, you see that 2.01 real rate of return. If that's going to be the new normal, if you will, for that asset class, and people have 20 to 30% of their assets in that asset class, a rate of return like 7% becomes more difficult to achieve. And that's just something to keep in mind as we look at not only the risk, but the long-term projections of contributions and funded percentages for the plan. And that's why we're watching it so close. So next slide, Danielle. This is some survey information that really is analogous or supporting of the idea that long-term capital market returns for different asset classes aren't what they used to be. This is a survey that was done by NASRA across several public pension plans. A lot of them at the state size level, but then some other ones as well that are good size, a lot like Genesee County. And what we see there is they collect this information across several plans on an annual basis. Over the years, the expectation across the surveyed plans are the assumption used, which speaks to the expectation of their assets, has kept going down. In 2008, on average, the people in the survey were using 7.97. But by the 2019 survey, that had dropped almost 70 basis points to 7.28. And you can really see where specifically it's dropping. If you look at the red bar in the 7.76 to 8% column, that's, where did that go? That's moved down the line, okay? And where we've got a pickup in the 7.25 range, the 7 to 7.25 range. So, and definitely even in 6.76 to 7%. So that's really the direction things have moved. The other thing that's striking about this is that amongst all these surveyed plans, there's nobody, by 2019, there's nobody that's using above 8%. Okay. So every plan is different, every allocation is different, but there's a general trend. The NCPERS survey or retirement system study has a lot of the same. What this does is it gives you some information not only about assumptions, but just overall funded ratios, amortization periods. And it's a nice way to benchmark where you are compared to some of the other public plans, not only in the state of Michigan, but even more broadly in the United States. And what we see here is the plan's funded ratio is a little bit lower, but fairly in line. The interest rate assumption, it's decreased. Again, we see that decreasing trend from 7.34 to 7.24, but our assumption currently at 7.4 is not horribly out of line. But the other thing that sticks out there is that everybody's talking about this, or at least almost everybody. 82% are saying we're considering reducing this. And really, I would speculate to guess that the 18% that aren't saying they're thinking about reducing it are people that just reduced it already. The amortization length of unfunded liability, again, your plan is fairly in line. And then also just average expenses, about 55 basis points of total assets, and this plan's was over 20 basis points lower than that. So that was good information there to see where the plan stacked up. The other assumption that drives liabilities, a decent amount of pension plans, and that we've talked about since we've worked with you because of where the assumption was when we started is the mortality assumption. There's been 3 significant studies in the past decade alone. The one that your current assumption is based off of was a study that was done in 2014, and it was done strictly about using private pension plan data. And really, when that study came out, we saw a lot of public plan auditors saying, hey, why aren't you using this if you weren't? But one of the things that a lot of public pension plans pointed out was, hey, we don't have real public pension plan data as part of that study. And so what the Society of Actuaries did was they said, okay, we're going to start collecting that data specifically. And this study, I think we first talked to you about it probably when we were addressing mortality back in the fall of 2018. At that point in time, when we were looking at making a move, the study was still in draft form. But as of January of last year, it was finalized and really followed the original draft form. And what that study did was it looked at 3 specific groups. It looked at teachers who live a really long time, general employees, like a lot of folks at the county, but then also public safety, specifically police and fire for the most part. And that study, now referred to in the actuarial world as Pub 2010, is really the new standard for public pension plans. And to that end, PA 202, the uniform assumptions that will be used for 2020, which will be then reflected in your reporting for essentially this time next year, we will be forced to use that assumption. But if you go to the next page, we get a sense of what does that do? I mean, how much longer do we think people are going to live with that new pension table for plans in place? And if we just focus on the general version of that table, and you could argue that there's segments of the population, like the sheriff part of the population, that we should use the public safety for, and we're certainly open to using one mortality assumption for that group versus the other. But if we just look at the general version of that table, what we see here is for males is that about a year longer than the current assumption that you have. So not a huge difference, but different. And then for females, it's about a year and a half different. And even so, there is going to be an impact. If we measured your liabilities right now for this year using this table, they'd be about 2% higher, about $13.9 million, which falls right in line with what we told you a couple of years, in December and November of 18, when we mentioned what the liabilities would look like with these tables. So you might ask, well, what are we saying we need to change this year? No, not this year, but I think based on the auditor's comments and really just the fact that your experience study that you did, I think it was 2015. I think the next time, at a minimum, the next time you do an experience study, this is the table we would look at for your plans. But I think if the auditor is pushing hard on the CASB side, and given that the PA 202 assumptions are moving to this, and given that the study was really done for public plans, it's something that you're probably going to we need to consider even for next year. And I don't think an experience study is too far down the line, even if we're next year. So let's go ahead and look at, before I talk about projections, any questions about the return assumption or mortality before I move on to some projected numbers? Okay. So if we look to page 23, this is our disclaimer page, but it essentially says it's very difficult to project the future. But on the next couple pages, we're going to try so you can understand where we see contributions going. What we have here is the red bar is really future contributions, but at 7%, ultimately at 7% after we see things lowering 0.15% each year, we're actually assuming assets are returning at 7% as well. And what we see here is the contributions bumping around 25 million for the next 4 to 5, 6, even 7 years, and then gradually working themselves down as this close period that we started last year wears away. And the plan over that same period, the funded percentage works its way up to 100% from where we are currently. And to Danielle's point earlier, once we get to 100%, and there's no more unfunded to pay, we see this huge drop off, and that's because at that point we're only paying normal costs. Contributions overall are probably going to be a little bit higher than what's shown here, not only after the 100%, but even for some of these future years, because right now this only projects our current plan population. For some of the open groups, there's going to be some additional normal costs for new employees. But overall, you get a sense of where these contributions are going. The next page tries to reflect the environment we're currently in, although negative 10% given the last 2 months in the market, and Chris can speak to this, might seem a little pessimistic for 2020 returns. But you just get a sense for what one difficult year could do. And here you see the contributions as if we had a big loss in 2020 and they're gradually recognized through asset smoothing, we see the contribution climbing to 32 or 33 million and then working its way down to over the same 25-year period. This is helpful to an extent in that it tells you that if you get that negative 10, your contributions aren't going to instantaneously go up, but you will have to pay for them. But the way it's not helpful is that it doesn't really presume that we get any bounce back if we had a negative 10 this year. It just assumes we get on the other side and have 7% from there forward. And we know that's not the way the market works. But what it does tell us when we compare the previous page to this one is that the next 25 years are highly susceptible to investment returns as you're paying off that unfunded especially. And that gets back to the original point of when I started talking, that the investment return is the greatest impactor of where your contributions, your funded percentage, and just the overall health of the plan goes. And so these charts are made to try to highlight the importance of that economic indicator, economic variable in a pension plan. So with that, that's what we have for prepared comments, but just wanted to know, I guess we would open it back up for any questions about the valuation draft that we sent out, as well as the presentation here that we walked through.
Hey, Nick, this is Jeff. I got a question.
Yep.
On the second projection, the 10% fall, 2025, it kind of looks like. Is there, I know we're in a closed plan. Is there a way to, and I know when we talked about going to a closed plan, it's like doing an amortization schedule just for like a big drop for this. Is there a way you could how that would look?
Yeah, you could, and really we're sort of stretching that out. At that point, what we're going to do is we're going to create a 25 layer next year, Jeff. That's really what we're doing evaluation. So each year, gains or losses, we're going to do a layer for relative to the expectation. We have the original 25 that tackled the big piece of unfunded that existed when we started this. But any ups and downs, and I stress ups and downs. So if we have a down, we're going to have a pretty big, cost basis, if you will, or cost layer. But if we have a better than expected result, we're going to have to go the other way.
Okay.
So ultimately, we're hoping that it all balances out and we still get everything funded up in 25 years. But we're going to tackle that. So I think, and that's a really great question, because the thing is, Jeff, let's say we're 3 years away from this period and we had a horrible year. We're not going to ask you to pay that off in 3 years.
Yeah,
we're going to start with, right? So that's the whole reasoning behind why we set up the funding policy that way. So that's one question.
Yep.
John, did you have a
Anything else?
question? John, did you have something?
No. Bill, this is Jeff Seifert. Question for Nick. I see two red flags being raised by you. One is the mortality rate, but you're kind of suggesting we wait a year or two. And the second one is the rate of return. You're coming out and saying that really the 7.4 that we have now is too high, and we really should be looking at something even lower than 7%, maybe even down to 6.5, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that a correct summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think we all know the 7.4 is too high. That's partially why we're whittling it down to 7. We're just trying to do it slower, so the impact on the contribution side isn't as quick, right, Jeff? I mean, and I think that's an approach we've seen other plans take. My concern is, and you've summarized it well, is that are we targeting getting to the right place as we whittle it down by 15 basis points a year? Is 7, based on the current allocation that we have, is 7 a good long-term assumption? And I think that based on the work that Chris did, based on the work that we can do, looking at what we see out in the market, what we see other expectations being for these different asset classes, unless you're going to get heavy into equities, 7% starts to be really tough to say, yes, we think we can make that long term. So yes, I think that's a correct summarization. I'm not coming with a specific recommendation that we drop the 6.5 and say we really need to be dropping 15 basis points to get to 6.5. But I think there needs to be continued dialogue about, and I think Chris is always going to do a good job for you there, about what your current asset allocation is expected to do for you on the return side. And on the mortality side, I'm not as concerned about that because we do have generational mortality in place. It is a 2% change, but it's not huge, and it's based on a study that's fairly recent. But I want everybody to be aware that both the state of Michigan and your auditor, and frankly, we think the best assumption is this public plan study. So I think, and I think we'll end up being there within the next year or two.
Thank you.
Yep.
Nick, this is Bill. I have a question. The assumption of 3% payroll growth, has our payroll grown 3% a year in the past? Is that a safe assumption to stick with, 3% growth?
I don't know, Danielle. I'll just say broadly, I know that we looked at that when the amortization schedules were set up. And keep in mind that we only do that for the plans that are open, okay? For the plans that are not, we just use what I would call level or flat, the same kind of calculation you do if you had a 25-year mortgage. And somebody said you're getting a $200,000 mortgage, you're going to pay the exact same amount every month or year for all 25 years. Here, you start with a lower number and it grows by 3% per year.
Okay.
But the payroll growth, I know we did look at that when we did the amortization, when we reconfigured things 25 years. But I don't know this year, Danielle, that we look at payroll growth by group year over year.
Right. So in the past, 3% has been a good indicator. This past year, payroll growth was lower than we expected. So I think overall payroll was less than 3% this past year, but just 1 year experience wouldn't be enough for us to change that assumption. But I think that's something we review again next year in, maybe a 5-year look back.
Okay.
And one thing, if you're looking at in detailed evaluation report, I would encourage you to not look at the total payroll growth, because inherently for the closed groups, payroll has a downward push on it, right? If we look at just the total plan, you almost have to look at group by group what's happening. Or at least the ones that are open and ongoing. What other questions for Danielle and I? Appreciate the questions though, for sure.
Anyone else?
Okay. This is Danielle one more time. I just wanted to remind you and to speak to the different employers about this contribution for fiscal year 2020 is decreasing for most groups other than general and sheriff's and Mount Morris. So I believe you make a contribution as a percent of payroll, and then at the end of the year do a true-up payment to get to that final contribution amount. So I would expect that true-up payment, would be smaller this year than in the past, or maybe that last percent of payroll contribution could be lower because there is a change for everyone's fiscal year 2020 contributions.
To the chairperson, Bill, I'd like to make a motion to accept the actuary's report. This is Seifert.
I got a motion to accept from Seifert. Is that Mark?
Yep.
All right. Any discussion? Clerk, take the roll, please.
Quartz,
Here. Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell, lose him.
Dan, did we lose you?
You muted?
Oh, I see him. Okay. Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter.
Yes.
A motion carried.
All right, motion.
Point of order to our chairperson. Through our new controller, Crystal, and Frank Judd, is there any other action we need to take on this report for implementing the items within it?
I don't believe that there's any more action to take now. I think for next year's study, we need to change the mortality table, but is anyone else?
I don't think the Retirement Commission needs to take any additional actions today.
All right. All right. Presentation is accepted, and move on to, thank you everybody from Nyhard, Nick and Danielle. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to C2, authorized retirement administrator for 21 contribution rates.
I would so move that the administrator notify the employer, also send a copy of the actual report.
Okay.
All right, we can do that.
Wait, I'm sorry. This is Deanna. Can I interrupt real quick to ask a question?
Go ahead.
Was 2018 revised reverse balance, was that combined with that, or is that a separate motion? B?
B, I believe it was all part of the same motion. It was all part of the same presentation.
Okay, I just wanted to just clarify that before I moved on. Can you please repeat the motion and the support for item 2? I'm sorry.
Item 2, the motion was to approve authorizing the retirement administrator to notify employers of the contribution rates, and it was made by Jeff,
Okay.
Seifert, Seconded by, do we have a second yet?
Young.
Mark,
Thank you. Okay. Sorry about that.
not a problem. Any other discussion? Ms. Clerk, take a vote.
Right. Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandalaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yeah.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. The Section 3 ANCO Consulting. Chris, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
And I think Jennifer has put on your screen the May capital market update. If it's like my screen, it's almost unreadable because of the small font size, so I apologize for that. But we had a pretty good month in May, coming off of what was a really good month in April, which was coming off of that horrible first quarter. And if you remember back last month when we got together, I had the April numbers. We were looking at like double-digit returns for the equity markets, kind of in that 10 to 15% range, depending on which benchmark we were looking at. With the international market being a little bit lighter. As I said, we had another good month, trying to make back some of those losses that we suffered in February and March. And you can see the S&P was up just under 5% for the month of for the month of May. Small and mid caps actually did a little bit better, kind of closer to the 7% mark. Now recall they actually had suffered much bigger losses during the market downturn. So we have a much further way to kind of get back out of the hole that we dug ourselves there. And we are starting to see a continued trend on that growth versus value. Although I will tell you, the month of June, we've seen a little bit of a reversal there, where value stocks have outperformed growth stocks. It's a very, very small sample size at this point, but it is something that we think will happen at some point down the road, where value will outperform growth. And as in kind of months past, the international markets didn't quite keep pace with the U.S. markets. You can see about a 4% return on that EFA index. Those are the developed markets, and the emerging markets really were just kind of breaking even for the month. More positive results on fixed income. You see about 0.5% for U.S. core fixed income. That's that U.S. aggregate. And really that corporate bond component has been driving the returns there in the second quarter. Now recall, we did suffer a pretty big loss in the investment grade side during the first quarter, so there was a lot of room to kind of come back there. And you can see they were up about 1.5% for the month. When we look at the year-to-date numbers, they have been on a big roller coaster, and I think this was what Nick was kind of touching on, was that down 10% year, which a couple months ago I would say looked very possible. Now all of a sudden it doesn't. The markets have come back so strongly here in the last 2 months, plus a week or so. We've made back a lot of those losses, and you can see the S&P is down about 5% for the first 5 months. Small and mid caps, you can see still in the double digits, and the international markets kind of in that same category, down about 15. We do have a nice return in fixed income so far this year, up about 5.5% there. So things are definitely going in the right direction. I will tell you, it's a little bit scary how fast the markets have come back. If you look at like that Russell 1000 growth index, year to date, it's actually up 5%. The NASDAQ has hit all-time highs just here in the last couple days or trading days. I get the sense the markets are anticipating that this reopening is going to go very smoothly, and that we aren't going to have any challenges with kind of people getting back to work. We did have a good payroll number last week, and that was kind of the fuel for Friday's rally. But there's a lot of speculation that those payroll numbers where 2.3 million people I think went back to work. I think a lot of that was driven by the that Payroll Protection Act that they put through, where small companies had to use the loan from the government to make payroll in order for it to be forgivable. And so I think the thought is a lot of people brought people back so that they could pay them. But we're not sure if those are going to be permanently, hired, or is this just a short-term component where they brought them back so they don't have to pay the loan back, but they'll end up, laying those people off again once the money from the loan has expired. So there's a lot of questions kind of in the markets, and the equity markets seem to be anticipating that things are going to go very well for the second half. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I would emphasize the word cautious more than optimistic at this point. Any questions kind of market related?
Hey, Chris, I do have a question. You said that pay loan from the federal government, they're afraid that they're going to lay people back off. Isn't part of that they have to keep them employed for, I believe, the rest of the year?
I think it's like 3 months or so, but I think there's still a lot of questions about that.
Okay.
And as I said, the fear is that the numbers aren't nearly as strong as kind of what was reported in that last report. And I will also point out a lot of the sectors that you were hoping to see people coming back to work have not. So finance being kind of one of the big ones where we haven't seen people really coming back. So it's a lot of, I would say, kind of more of the manual labor jobs, people, doing construction and stuff like that, where we saw some of the better improvements. Just, anecdotally, I think they said it's like 1 in 4 people have been laid off or, are kind of out of work at this point. From, if you think back, we were at about under 4% unemployment just 3 months ago. So it's amazing how many people are out of work. As I said, we did get a little tick up in this last reading, but we still have a long, long ways to go. And I think most, the experts out there are suggesting that if we can get to like 10% unemployment by the year end, that would be incredible. So we have a long way to go to kind of get there. And that's still a really high number. So like the unemployment level that we hit this time basically is on par with where we were at in the Great Depression. Now, I don't think any of us were around back then. I know I wasn't, but if you're thinking back to like, the 30s and kind of your history from high school, there was, that's kind of an incredible time. And then to think that we've basically got to that point in the matter of a couple months. As I said, that's kind of the scary part. I think the expectation is that we reopen and everyone's back to work and everything's fine. I don't think many people really expect that to kind of be how it plays out. So I do think that people are going to be out of work for longer than maybe the markets are anticipating at this time. Any other questions? So I do have some updated market values. Jennifer has just popped those up on the page for you. We continue, as I said, to see the benefits of the recovery in the equity markets show up on our bottom line there for the total fund. And you'll note, actually, we're now to a position where we're actually slightly overweight in equities. So by about 1.7 million or so. And a little bit more so on the international side, particularly due to that WCM. If you remember, they're the ones who are actually positive over the last 12 months through April. And on the fixed income side, we are overweight. Recall, we are using the fixed income managers for liquidity in the next couple months. And where we're also a little bit underweight is in the real estate side. So we'll be looking at probably adding a manager or two in that space. probably, I would say in the next 3 months or so that we can continue to add to that. So if you remember, like the Alidate 2 used to be on that list, it's gone because it did pay out. And so as we get towards the end of some of these funds, the Alidate 3 is probably next in line. The JCR 3 is kind of, I would say, closely behind that one. The idea is we're going to have to continue to add new managers to that lineup to keep our allocation close to the 18%. And so from that standpoint, I think we're all set. And I do have a couple other kind of items, kind of more housekeeping. One is we did have an IC meeting back on the 26th of May, and we looked at distressed debt. It was determined by the investment committee at that time that we would not pursue going into that asset class. We also discussed securities lending. So if you remember, and actually Nair, who I think brought this up originally, maybe late last year, we took a look at where we're at with the securities lending. I will tell you, as interest rates go down, the amount of money that you make in securities lending generally goes in the same direction. And given kind of where we're at, the discussion that we had at the IC was that this may be a good point for us to exit securities lending. I did check with Comerica on what is the process to get out, and it's a pretty simple letter saying we would like to exit the securities lending program. And at that point, then they'll go through the process of starting to recall any securities that are outstanding. Dan Bird indicated it probably takes somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple of weeks for you to get completely out of the program, and then we would have no exposure to that collateral pool or any of the gains that would be associated with the securities lending. So, and just this, I think actually, Jennifer, if you want the email from Dan Bird on the cash account, I think that's 39, maybe slide 39. So just, I want to say it was last week, we received notification from Dan Bird at Comerica that they are offering a new cash vehicle. So our current money, cash that is in the account, so this would be any cash balances in your active managers, think like Mackay and SIT in particular, is put into a money market account. Currently, we're using a government version, which means all of the investments in there are going to be backed by the US government or agencies, and very, very safe. I will tell you kind of where interest rates are. That also means very, very little in the way of yield. And in fact, Comerica is at this point, I believe, waiving all management fees on that in the hopes of kind of getting us maybe a basis point or two of return on that strategy. So we're not really going to make any money in the cash account, but at the same time, we're not taking any risk in that account either. Comerica has offered us the ability to use a demand deposit version. Basically, what they would be doing is sending the available cash out into like FDIC-backed bank type investments. So think of putting $250,000 in Comerica and $250,000 in Fifth Third and across the country, kind of like in an overnight CD. They estimate you might be able to get somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 10 basis points return, so about 8 extra basis points of return over the current vehicle that you have, but it's not without risk. And so there are the potential for, I wouldn't say necessarily like losing the money, but there could be like errors within the wiring of funds, in which case you may not get any interest on those funds, as they're trying to figure out what happened with the wire. I would say it's probably a low risk of something like that happening. Our recommendation is the pass on this, that the incremental return that you might get from that program just isn't really worth kind of the additional risk, as well as the potential kind of administrative burden that might come with something if anything were to go wrong. I think I have a couple more kind of housekeeping items, and then I'll wrap up, and we'll take some motions to maybe enact some of these. The alter domus, you can see this is Cortland. It's probably a name you're not overly familiar with, but a number of alternative managers use Cortland as their administrator, particularly kind of on the real estate side. They were pretty popular with real estate managers. So Cortland, a couple years ago, actually entered into an agreement with this alter domus to kind of merge together. And they left the Cortland name as was for a number of years, and now they're rebranding themselves under the kind of the parent company's version. And so there's no action required. This is more of just a notice that if you had looked through your packet and occasionally saw a statement come through from Cortland, you're not going to see the Cortland name any longer. It's going to be this alter domus. And then the last item that Jennifer just popped up was the JCR. If you remember, the Friday before our meeting in May, we received notice from them that they've requested to reallocate some committed capital. And our recommendation is that you approve this. It's actually past the deadline, but I think it still makes sense for us to be on record that we do approve it and send it back to them. Just kind of in a nutshell, JCR had kind of pledged money to some real estate developers, investors, and then as they went through kind of the economic shutdown, it became apparent that they probably never were going to call the money. And so instead of this money never being put to work, they've come across some other investments that they would like to do. And I will tell you, our expectation is that investments made kind of post April of 2020 are probably going to be better than some of that were made kind of pre-2000 or April 2020. So, we think that this probably makes sense from a investment standpoint, that they'll be able to make a couple more good investments on your behalf. So, and with that, I'm going to pause, take any questions.
I do have a question through the chair.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Frank, were you able to look over any of these documents from JCR prior to this?
Yes, our office reviewed these documents from JCR, and they don't have any legal impact on your qualification or your relationship with them.
Thank you.
And I should point out, it doesn't change any of the terms of the investment. So you're not extending the investment period, you're not extending the term, and you're not changing the fee structure.
Thank you, Chris. Correct.
Anyone else have any questions for Chris? If not, we'll take a motion to accept the report on items 3A and B.
I make a motion to approve Chris's investment report.
So moved, Seifert.
Tracy and Seifert, any further discussion?
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
His report actually included items A, B, C, D, E, and item 4.
Right, I was just going to use the first two and then take C, D, E, and 4 individually. I know there probably isn't much for us to do on C. I didn't know if the board wanted to take a vote on item D or not.
I think, Ms. Seifert, we have a number of different items here. It's probably more appropriate to follow Bill's direction just do a motion on the first two as accepting that report, and handle the other 3 or 4 items separately.
Is that all right with you, Mr. Young?
I have no problem with that. The only thing is that the recommendation for the motion was to accept his report, which would include those other items. So we may want to modify the motion to reflect items 3A and 3B only.
Okay, motion so will be reflected as such. Ms. Clerk, take a vote.
Okay. Khan,
Yes.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert.
Yes.
The motion carried.
All right, we'll handle items 3C, Comerica Securities Lending Update. Sounded like
Bill?
we aren't I know the, yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Cypher. We talked about this in the investment committee,
Hi.
and we discussed withdrawing from the securities lending through Comerica. So I would like to make the motion that we do notify Comerica that we are ceasing the securities lending agreement with them.
Yeah.
Right, I was gonna, yeah, if that's all we have to do is just agree that we want out, we can do so with a letter, it sounded like. So I got a motion from Jeff to direct that letter being drafted.
Second.
Take a support from Courts.
I had supported it. Well, it doesn't matter. She can do it. I supported the first time, but Tracy, that's fine.
Oh.
Okay, any other discussion? Ms. Clerk, take a roll.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, item 3D, the cash management fund election. Is there any interest in pursuing that?
This is Khan. I make a motion that we decline that offer.
Young, support.
Thank you, Ms. Khan and Mr. Young. Any other discussion? Ms. Clerk, take the roll.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandelaris.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we can we just file 3E, rebranding of a corporate name?
This is Seifert. In hindsight, we probably could have included E with A and B, but that's not. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and approve the rebrand of Portland to Alter Domus through a motion.
I'll
All
support.
right,
Motion to accept and file.
motion to accept and file.
Mandelaris.
Madam Clerk, go ahead and take the roll real quick.
Okay, Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept item 4, JCR investment reallocation request.
Support. Courts.
Young and Courts, any other discussion? Ms. Clerk, take the roll.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Han,
Yes.
Andalaris.
Yes.
Motion carried.
C5, approve the bank authorized signatures.
So this would be to add Crystal now that she is the secretary for GSERS. So we need to get her on the account.
I make a motion that we approve the updated signature authorization page.
Thank you, Ms.
Support,
Khan.
Seifert.
Mr. Seifert. Ms. Clerk?
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Han,
Yes.
Andalaris,
Question. Why
Russell.
does the resolution not have Mr. Young's name on it?
I believe it does. It's number 4 on the authorized signatures there.
I don't think the resolution has to.
And we're only authorizing one person, give him, one person the authorization to sign on behalf of the commission? Shouldn't it be 2 or 3?
Mr. Judd, are we missing a signature here?
I was following previous resolutions.
Judd, do you think we ought to have more than one authorization signature?
So this is Crystal, just one comment. Anything that gets approved out of the retirement office, I approve and sign off. So internally, we have that second level of review, that 2 people have to be involved in it. For the bank's purpose, they only need one of those signatures to be able to process the transaction. So just for your knowledge.
Okay, so we're not breaking any new ground with this then?
No.
Okay. Mr. Mandelaris, do we have your support?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Chase.
Ms. Clerk, I think we left off with Russell.
Yep, Russell,
Yes.
Simpson.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, move on to C6, Allidated attachment. This is just to be filed, or is there any?
Actually, I think Frank or Chris were going to talk on this one.
Frank, you still with us?
I'm still here.
I am here. I'll let Chris take the lead as this is more of an investment side of things. So go ahead, Chris, and I'll chime in if necessary.
Okay. And actually, I think I misspoke when I said that the JCR came right before our last meeting. I think this was the document that got sent to us that Friday before our May meeting. So Alidate, as they went back, and they're actually kind of preparing documents for their next fund. And when they were going through that process, they were reviewing the agreements that they had for funds 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, excuse me. And there was like an ambiguous definition for value. So the importance of that is when you do a loan to value calculation, obviously the value part is very important as well as the amount of the loan. And as I said, there was a little question exactly what was the meaning within the document. And so this amendment is to kind of clarify that definition of value for the partnerships. We do not have any issue with this. We recommend that you approve it.
Our office reviewed those changes as well, recommended some slight revisions to what they had proposed. They have incorporated our recommended revisions. And so we don't have any issues as well from a legal standpoint for both the amendment to Fund 3 and Fund 4. So your next 2 agenda items.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Take a motion to accept and the change in wording here.
C6 and C7?
C6 and C7. We're just changing the name, correct? Definition.
This is Cipher. Based on our council, I would make a motion to approve the changes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Seifert.
Support.
Is that Dan?
Yeah, Russell support.
All right, thank you, sir. Any other further discussion? Madam Clerk?
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandalaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Awful lot of housekeeping cleared up there. We'll move on to section C8, schedule of new retirees.
Move to approve.
Support.
Quartz and Simpson, any discussion? Madam Clerk?
Oh, sorry, hang on, just gotta see where I left off here. Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandalaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter.
Yes.
Motion carried.
C8 will be accepted. Moving on to C7, schedule of deceased retirees.
Make a motion
C9,
to
my
accept.
apologies.
Cipher.
Support Carpenter.
Seifert and Carpenter, Madam Clerk?
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandalaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young, Young,
Yes.
okay. Brandon,
Yes.
motion carried.
Moving on to C10, schedule of reemployed retirees. I believe Jennifer had a comment here, a correction.
Yes, for Mary C., she had 717 hours that was submitted this morning. And Pamela Crawford can be removed. It doesn't show any hours, but I just needed to add 717 for fee.
I make a motion to approve the schedule of reemployed retirees.
Support Mandalaris.
Any other discussion, Madam Clerk?
Khan,
Yes.
Mandalaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item C11, schedule of refunds.
This is Cipher. I have a question on to either Jeff Carpenter or Jennifer. The gentleman by the name of Jason Lupchuk, he is drawing a rather large amount. Is he aware or was advised of its consequences?
I don't know.
He rolled it into another plan.
Oh, okay.
He rolled over his money, yes.
Okay.
That's what I
Thank
was
you.
thinking. I think he works for the state now.
Okay, based on that, I make a motion to approve.
All right, thank you, Ms. Seifert. Ms. Khan, support. Madam Clerk?
Mandalaris,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
motion carried.
All right, schedule of billings and expenses, item C12.
Motion to approve Cipher.
Deceased refund estate.
Support,
Cipher.
Khan.
Support Khan, any discussion? None? Madam Clerk?
Russell,
Yes.
Simpson,
It's a deceased refund estate.
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Khan,
Yes.
Mandelaris.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion carried. Moving on to section 13, the legal report presented by Mr. Judd.
I think we have
Afternoon,
Mr.
everyone.
Goldsmith.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Crystal to the board officially, so welcome. And I would like to then kick this over to David Goldsmith, who I believe is still on the line. Who can speak to Labaton's update and the portfolio monitoring agreement that is also in your agenda packet. So David, if you're here, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Frank, and I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see and hear all of you. I'm David Goldsmith from Labaton Sucharo. I can be brief as we end this month's meeting. My only update for ongoing cases is just a very brief update on the appeal in the Isdafix antitrust litigation. The Fortinbras objector brief in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. That's going to come in about a month on July 2nd. So we'll get that, and then we'll get to work on opposing it. And our brief will be due sometime after that. We'll be setting that date. So the appeal is going to be getting started soon. So that's where that is. But the main reason for the update today is that we've been working for some time in our firm to improve our processes in terms of our internal systems in managing client data, including yours. We've got a new system called Page that we're working on with enhanced security features that we're going to be rolling out over the next coming months, 18 months or so. Basically, it's, as I said, largely for security purposes. I mean, we have concerns about as there's been news about security breaches and the like, we want to be sensitive to that, with our client data. And as we've been working on this system, we've been entering into updated global portfolio monitoring agreements with our various clients. The main difference is really just to refresh it based on the new system that we're rolling out. The terms of the agreement really hasn't changed in any real material way. So what you'll see in your materials is an update from us with the basics of the system that we're working on and a draft of the agreement. The agreement is signed by myself, of course, and also signed by my partner, Michael Canty, who's our in-house general counsel. We have a policy at our firm that all of our contracts are signed by our in-house counsel, as well as potentially by the partner who has the client relationship. So that's what's there. I'm happy to answer questions about the contract, of course. Obviously, I'm also, if Frank wants to, may want to speak with me offline about that, and I'm of course available to him separately. But we'd like to enter into the agreement with Genesee County at some convenient time in the future. That's really all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
If I may, our firm did review the proposed agreement provided by Mr. Goldsmith. We don't have any issues with it, and recommend that the board continue its relationship with Labaton Sucharo for portfolio monitoring. And then, of course, if they recommend any cases moving forward, the board can then decide whether to, retain Labaton and pursue that case or not. So.
Right. Thank you very much, Frank. As I said, the principal terms have not changed. Most importantly, nothing binds Genesee County to retain our firm if we recommend action in a given case. I mean, that's really the key substantive aspect of these monitoring agreements. and that remains unchanged in this new proposed agreement. I appreciate Frank, making that crystal clear. So thank you very much.
You need to take a vote on
This is Seifert. I'd like to make a comment about Labitron. They have always been very attentive to our issues and our lawsuits that we're starting for our behalf. They've always sent people. Now we're into the Zoom meetings, but Dave's been to visit us many times. Very attentive. I'm very happy with the service they've provided.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
I don't think you'll find any complainers on this board about their services. I'm going to take a motion to accept their retainer agreement and move forward.
I would so move. This is Seifert.
Thank you, Mr.
Carpenter,
Seifert.
support.
Question,
Mr. Carpenter.
question.
Go ahead, Mr. Mandelaris.
Yeah, who is going to sign it on behalf of the Retirement Commission? Was that Frank or somebody else?
Won't be me, no.
Who are we authorizing?
No, that it wouldn't be Frank. Should be. I mean, I think any trustee could sign it. Perhaps if the chair of the board could do that, or it could be Jennifer. I think also.
Would that be
I believe we got.
Who's going to sign?
I'll sign it, John. I'm looking at the hard copy here in the office.
That's great.
If it passes.
Put that in the motion then.
All right. We'll add to the motion to have the board chair sign on behalf of the retirement system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk?
Simpson,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
Hahn,
yes,
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell.
yes,
Okay, motion carried.
All right, that signature will be done quickly here. Any further items from anybody? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mandelaris.
support, Con,
Any discussion? I believe next year, or next month, we're all back in face-to-face, the board. Madam Clerk?
Can I clarify that?
Yes.
What would next month and, okay, that's fine. Yes, okay, never mind. I'm good.
All right. Madam Clerk, take the adjournment roll here.
Okay. Young,
Yes.
Brandon,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Quartz,
Yes.
Seifert,
Be safe out there. Yes.
Hahn,
yes.
Mandelaris,
Yes.
Russell,
yes.
Simpson.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried.
Thank you. See you next month, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Person shortly.
Okay, Frank's calling us. Let me get out of all of this. Are we?